Amanda from Pontes Books here with the chapter 24 historical tidbit for The Prince and the Pauper. Today's historical tidbit has to do with a point in the story where Miles is more educated than another character and therefore has the ability to speak another language, and he kind of uses that to take advantage of this other character to help out his buddy Edward. So that language that he speaks is our historical tidbit for today. We are looking at Latin in Tudor England. What do we know about people speaking Latin at that time? So here's the reference that I was talking about. This is Miles speaking first and then kind of alternating with the constable who is supposed to be taking Edward to jail, basically. And so in the previous chapter, Miles had witnessed the constable basically blackmail this woman into giving her pig to him for a cheaper price. Miles saw that, he kind of held that against him, and the guy was trying to play it off like it was a joke, but Miles is trying to scare him by making it sound like it's this complex crime using Latin. So this is Miles. Yes, it hath a name. In the law, this crime is called non compus mentis lex talionis sic transit gloria mundi. Ah, my God! And the penalty is death. God be merciful to me, a sinner. So this phrase these are real Latin words, but they're kind of put together in a random order, and it is not the name of a crime, and it's kind of just something random. So he kind of said it to make it just sound fancy, which if you've ever seen the movie Legally Blonde, this kind of reminds me of a moment where she goes to help get her friend's dog back, and she's talking to her friend's like ex, and kind of the same in this situation. She assumes that he's less educated and doesn't know much about the law, so she throws out a bunch of legal jargon to kind of intimidate him so that they can take that back. So this kind of reminds me of that moment. He's definitely assuming that this man speaks no Latin, and it turns out he doesn't. It was a correct assumption. So what do we know about speaking Latin in Tudor England? So kind of up to that point, Latin was the language of the church, which was, huge at that time. And so if you wanted to participate in anything in church, you had to know, at least some Latin to be able to participate. It was also used in many legal and state documents. After the Reformation, however, which King Henry VIII started, so while he was in reign, while right in the smack dab in the middle of this period, Latin was no longer used in the church. That was connected to the Catholic Church. So briefly after Henry VIII died and Edward died, then his sister Mary had a brief reign as queen. She tried to bring the Catholic Church and Latin back, but then it went away. They went back to the Church of England. So Latin was replaced by the Book of Common Prayer and English translations of the Bible. So that's when Latin really started being phased out. But that's kind of big picture what was happening with Latin in Tudor England. On a more individual level, boys typically were the ones who would learn it, and I mean probably royal girls as well. As we've seen, we've talked about Latin briefly in a previous video when we talked about what subjects royals would especially Edward, learned in school, and also how many languages that Henry VIII spoke. So I think Latin's actually come up a few times. So a royal would definitely have learned it. But even if you weren't royal, a boy would learn it in grammar school, which was ages 7 to 14 for families who could afford it. So there was a chunk of schooling before that where you would really learn some of your, fundamentals. But yeah, if you could afford to kind of go further in your schooling, then you would have learned some Latin. So we did see that, I'm pretty sure that Tom knew some. Yes, he did. He learned it from Father Andrew. So he did not learn it in school, but he did learn some too. So they would study rudimenta grammatices. by William Lilly. So that was a pretty common Latin text, I guess you could say, a Latin, a book that taught Latin. And that was even so famous, it was referenced in several Shakespeare plays. And I believe when I was reading, it said that this was replaced by something else. And then that was used all the way, the person who was writing the article, like used that book to learn grammar, or sorry, to learn Latin. So these books last for a really long time, because obviously now at this point, Latin's not really changing, and are still used. So this book is probably still around, or it could be found in one way or another. So then also just something that was mentioned is at this time, something called the Great Vowel Shift took place, which ultimately led kind of to modern English. So the ways that the vowels were said in Latin were tweaked ever so slightly. And at the time, they thought that was like, you know, improper. There were like multiple branches of grammar that kind of came out of this time. And that all kind of happened in this Tudor England time period. So to bring it back to the original example, it is likely that our friend the constable, if he had not had a lot of schooling, he probably did not speak any Latin and therefore was very confused. And if he did speak a little bit, it would have been related maybe to the church from when he was younger, which would not have been any of the terms that Miles was throwing out. So that's Latin in Tudor England. Hopefully you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.